Greetings. This is Griff Ruby with yet another Nostalgia Catholic with another review of another Asimov short story. We're now getting up into 1961. In the March 1961 issue of Amazing, we have a story, and the name of the story, although the cover art pertains to another story, at least the name of this is on the top here, Playboy and the Slime God. Now, this one's got kind of a bit of a backstory to it. It all starts in the late 1930s, mostly with a particular magazine that was most willing to do some crazy stuff, known as Marvel. I don't have any samples of that. I don't think I'm really interested to have that. I'll kind of revisit that a little bit. But what they did was they had some, certainly for the time, and I don't know, I think rather, let's just say the raunchiness of the story seemed to be literally the only point to it. I mean, you just got this Captain whatever, you might as well be Captain Proton or something for all the interest he really has. I mean, I'm facetiousizing it a little bit. And he just, suddenly a weird ray hits him and makes him float in the air, and he spins around, and then he falls down, and then this two-headed monster comes at it with one head like a lizard's head and the other like a blob of jelly, and then another monster comes, and then he takes a gun to it and he mows it down, and then he goes along, and all of a sudden there's a big flame, and this weird person comes floating up out, and it's this, and it would be this girl with, now suddenly the descriptions get very detailed, very long, legs a mile long, tanned legs, and anyway, just all this kind of stuff. And what was it? Elliptical phrases, I think, is Asimov's commentary at any rate. And that seemed to be the only point. There was so. They gathered some of this stuff into a volume of other collection I won't go too much into, but it has probably the three worst offenders, which interestingly enough were written by one of the other authors that has some things I actually liked, and that was Henry Kuttner. I mentioned that I saw his happy ending in a collection that got Asimov's Portable Star as its only official reissue. Another story of his I was thinking of that I'm particularly fond of, called Gingerbread Left, was written during World War II, and it was a fictitious way of ending World War II, which was very clever. I mean, there is real talent there, but in these stories, the writing is just abysmal. I mean, forget even the seedy stuff, which is just, unnecessary, gratuitous, whatever. It's just bad. The phrase that goes through my mind is, "This is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing." At any rate, so then in the November 1960 issue of Playboy, they decided to do a special. It was an article on science fiction. I found a reprint of the article, or text of it, and it is an article, it's not a story or anything, and it pretends to say, well, there's all these good old days when sci-fi was full of this stuff, when in fact they had to dig to find any of it at all. So they get that far, and now there's some reports, and I'm going to have to say I regard them as unverified, that Asimov had supposedly wanted to get on the pages of Playboy by writing them some kind of a sci-fi story, and they turned him down, and after that he boycotted them and so forth. I don't know. Maybe not. I mean, I'll have to think about that. We have another story called Eyes Do More Than See, and I think that was sponsored by them, and he did write a story, which also ends up somewhere else. So, at any rate, what happened was amazing. He gives the story. The story, as I said, Playboy and the Slime God, that isn't the title he really felt best with it. It's collected in Nightfall and Other Stories. And let's see what we have. Alright, he gives this little story here how it came about. It says, this one is complicated. It goes back to 1938 and 39 when, for some half a dozen issues or so, a magazine I won't name tried to make a go of what I can only call spicy science fiction stories. I'll go ahead and name them. The magazine he's talking about, Marvel. And most principally the first 3 issues, actually. And, each contained a story by Henry Kuttner, one of them under one of his pseudonyms, James Hall, but that's just him, that's a pseudonym. Considering the sexual freedom allowed the writers of today, these old spicy SF stories read like the Bobbsey twins in outer space. I don't know, I'm not sure he went quite that far, but they were sizzlers to the magazine's few readers then. Anyway, he continues on. He mentions about how Playboy had done this stuff. So, and he says that Playboy also made these pseudo covers featuring, the idea was you got these scantily-clad girls for some reason always being pursued by weird, slimy alien monsters that are, I don't know, seem to be particularly obsessed with removing their clothes and ogling them. Weird, slimy, mucous monsters, with whatever. And it occurs to me, having read the article, it did make one brief mention to a different magazine, upon which, and some bit of a story, one of these things where I guess the goddess leader of the lizard people, or whatever, meets her end and talk about that kind of stuff. And it talked about how that, however, referred to a 1939 story in Planet Story. Now, this kind of cover kind of exemplifies the sort of thing. There she is, and there's this bizarre, ugly, slimy looking. I mean, look at that face. A face only a budding parent, could possibly love, I think, and you wouldn't believe what Asimov story is in that issue. That's not the one they were talking about. That's the 1942 issue. If you've been following this series, you would remember it actually contains Asimov's story, the Black Friar of the Flame, which he's ashamed of the story, but I think maybe he's more ashamed of where it ended up, that it had to come to a magazine that would, have to put such art on its cover. I mean, I don't think he ever wanted to involve himself with that, but he couldn't sell it to Astounding, he couldn't sell it to Astonishing or Super Science Fiction, he couldn't even sell it to Amazing, and finally he ended up, I don't know, I'm not sure if Marvel still existed, but he couldn't even sell it. He finally sold it to Planet Stories, so that's how far gone it went. Well, it's a satire of those kinds of stories, and I think on the whole a rather funny one. Let's see here. As I said, it's in March 1961, Amazing, and we have, let's see, yeah. So here it is in the short table of contents. Playboy the Slime God by Isaac Asimov, page 30. So let's take a look at page 30 and what we got here. Because again, you get some blurbs and artwork that don't get reprinted in the book. So I'll start with a rather lengthy blurb. This is kind of briefly how it looks. We'll look more at it. Several months ago, a magazine named Playboy, which concentrates editorially on girls' books, girls' art, girls' music, fashion, girls, and girls, published an article about old-time science fiction called Girls for the Slime God. It was illustrated with synthetic covers of non-existent SF magazines, each replete with bug-eyed monster, mad scientist, and partially naked nubile girl. Well, some of them didn't have to be that way, certainly not the other one. It's the only one I had on hand, actually, just to kind of illustrate what we're talking about. Okay. But the article quickly disillusioned the reader. It bemoaned the fact that current SF magazines seem to abjure sex. Evidently to titillate its readers, the Playboy article then went on to quote some of the allegedly erotic descriptions from SF magazines of a generation ago. But even then, it seems Playboy had a hard time finding sexy stuff. It acknowledges that only one magazine, even in those days, went around regularly ripping the clothes off Earth girls and exposing their ivory bosoms. We at Amazing felt kind of sorry for the Playboy people, you know? No more really exciting stuff in the SF mags and all that. How are you going to get in kicks anymore if these SF writers start talking about cultural taboos instead of heaving breasts? Compassion is our middle name. We commissioned one of SF's most sex-appealing writers to create a story especially for the insatiable Playboy and prove to him that SF has not forgotten that FS is the most important thing in the universe. Playboy and the Slime God, illustrated by Summers. Okay, so that's what we have there. And here you have kind of the perfect satire. Now, there are two drawings associated with it. This one kind of shows here the guy looks like some kind of He-Man hero, the big chest, the barrel chest, and the athletic arm muscles and so forth. And here's this girl looking very vulnerable and very and this is weird alien creature already beginning to take her barely exists as it is clothes off. It gets followed a little later on with a little bit of a more realistic drawing here. So here now we have these two somewhat different aliens, because there are two aliens in the story, so that actually makes sense. You have the guy, let's look at him briefly. He's just kind of, he's got his hat, he's got a long coat. He just looks like some ordinary Joe from a rather cold weather town. And then here's this lady, oh man, she just looks like she's ready to nag you to death, I mean, not at all the kind of stereotypical, nubile, but more realistic. So, and that's exactly it. The alien beings have kidnapped a man and a woman. You see, because apparently these aliens breed by budding. They just sort of like those plants that just, or bacteria that just kind of put out little spores, and the spores just grow up, and that's it. That's their reproduction. But apparently these two aliens, and one of them somehow had some time to spend some time looking at humans and seeing, what we do. And the other one, so he's telling the other one, his boss, Captain, let's see here, Botox, and let's see, Captain Garm. Okay, Captain Garm has to be informed of all this. Botox says, oh yes, these humans are weird. They look like two species, but they have to interact. They have to cooperate somehow in order to bear young. And Captain Garm's kind of like, oh, don't be ridiculous. And so they kidnap these two, a human guy and a girl, and they try to get them to cooperate. That's the word they use. And of course, they're just random strangers, that were just picked up at a train station. Don't know each other and so forth. So they're trying to get them to do stuff, and just making it all kind of clinical and analytical, and taking all the kind of stuff out of it. Suddenly, it's all funny. They want the guy to do something to the girl. Well, they always show them kissing, so it must be a kiss, but we're not a hot kiss, a flaming kiss. We don't detect any rise in temperature. We're measuring very carefully. What's going on? Why isn't that working? Anyway, the two aliens are finally Botox, or is it Botox? Whatever. Botox is that's something else. Never mind. Botox is trying to persuade them to do whatever. And they finally, in the end, the captain just thought, "You're full of garbage. I don't believe you. It's ridiculous. And we'll stop playing with these stupid creatures. Send them back, and let's be on our way. We got other places to go." And so finally, Botax has no alternative but to send them backward to the train station. Luckily, it was all in a time bubble, so they just come back in an instant, so they didn't even miss their train. How convenient. And I'll leave the ending as a spoiler. I won't spoil the ending, which, by the way, apparently wasn't even written by Asimov himself anyway. His editor or somebody here, maybe at Amazing, somebody there, decided to rewrite it, and he liked the rewriting so well he's let it stand in what places the story has turned up ever since. So, anyway, it's a humorous story, and I dare say the humor really does succeed. So, he's finally coming into his own, really, with humor. And she's kind of making fun of something that it's like a stereotype. It's like we all kind of knew there were covers like that before, but somehow when you actually look for them, they can be surprisingly difficult to find. So apparently the Playboy article had made up these fictitious covers. So, I don't know. Anyway, that's kind of a, less glamorous aspect. Like I said, Asimov did put his own toe in the water, and that way one time some number of stories ago with the Portable Star, where he actually intended to do it seriously. And, well, let's just say that's a flop. That's such a big flop he didn't even want it reprinted anywhere. So, but I have to cover all the stories. So, I get all of them. So, I think that's all we got on that. Thanks for listening.